Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Siobhan Barrow, Head of Intermediary Distribution at Scottish Widows. Now, today's session is such an important area for all of us, with the recent announcements advising everyone to work from home where possible for the foreseeable future. Cybersecurity is becoming an increasingly important factor for all businesses going forward. So we hope that you find the information provided today in today's webinar extremely useful. Now, today I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleagues Alec Howard, Gareth Thomas and Murray Jackson, who are all part of our cybersecurity teams across the Lloyds Banking Group. Tony Clark, one of our regional development managers, will also be hosting the Q&A section at the end, so please do use the Ask a Question function to submit your questions at any point during the presentation. Tony will keep a lookout for some key themes and he can put those to the team towards the end of the session. Now, the webinar is being recorded, so it will be available for you to share with colleagues, etc. after the event, and you can use the same link that you used today. Now, we've already had some amazing topics on our expert series, with some of the most popular additions being a brilliant session from the regarding the economic state of the nation with Paul Johnson from the IFS, and an overview of best practice supporting vulnerable customers with Dan Holt. We've got lots more to come before the end of the year, including an interview with the broadcaster Dr. Mike Mosley, which will look at the benefits of a healthy lifestyle for combating illnesses, etc. So do head over to our Expert Series webpage, where you'll see all the recordings from previous sessions, but it will also give you an insight into what's to come. Now, as I mentioned right at the top, it's a very timely topic to discuss cybersecurity, so I don't want to waste any further time. So let's get started. Alec, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining today for what I hope will be a very informative and enjoyable event, and I appreciate everybody giving up time in your busy diaries to attend this. So, brief introduction on myself. I head up the Scottish Widows Divisional Security Team. I guess in a nutshell, my job is to ensure that our parent group, Lloyds Banking Group, security policies and requirements are in place to help manage and ensure security risk is minimised for Scottish Widows and our customers. So personally, for me, a very interesting, varied role. There's rarely a dull moment or day, and particularly as Siobhan says, COVID-19 has made this a really interesting dimension to manage these risks at the moment, given, particularly some of the trends and themes we've been seeing as a group. Phishing emails, for example, has gone through the roof earlier in the lockdown period this year. So, never has this kind of topic been more critical than now. I'll just hand over to my colleagues, Gareth, to give a quick introduction on their roles within the group. Gareth, I can hand over to you.
Good morning. My name is Gareth Thomas. I work for the Chief Resilience and Security Office in Lloyds Banking Group, and I'm responsible for helping colleagues understand the cyber threats that affect them and their families and the group, and to protect our customers as well from cyber and physical security threats. Murray, sorry. Murray, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gareth. Good morning, everyone. My name is Murray Jackson. I'm an intelligence manager within the Lloyds Banking Group Chief Resilience and Security Office, working within the Strategic Intelligence team. Strategic Intelligence is about highlighting medium to longer term threats that could impact any part of the group and escalating them to the correct area or stakeholder. These could impact decision making or just inform the latest understanding of a threat. I'm also joined by my colleague Darren Morrissey, who leads the operational intelligence part of our team. So operational intelligence is much more reactive and involves daily scanning of intelligence sources and news to identify potential immediate threats to Lloyds Banking Group and to escalate them, often generating short-term actions to address any new or evolving threats. So Alec, back to you.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you, Gareth. And just before we get started, I will kind of caveat this presentation a little bit. This is general limited guidance that we're giving you here today, guys. So it isn't a replacement in thinking that, this covers absolutely everything. You are recommended definitely to speak to your professional IT provider or internal IT teams within your business, or however you're doing that. I know we've got a very varied audience on the call, but it's general guidance. This doesn't cover absolutely everything, but hopefully it's really good food for thought for you to think about, have we got some of these controls and processes in place to protect our business, okay? In terms of an agenda of what we're running through, we'll cover the kind of typical ways that attackers get in to try and attack a business. Then we'll go into some more specifics of those particular trends and attacks that they might do. So that's covering websites attacks, business email compromise, home and mobile working, how social engineering could happen, malware and ransomware, and cloud risk, and then we'll finish off with some actual real examples where this has gone wrong for businesses and why this is also critical. Okay, but before we get started, I'm going to start with a little poll to see, get people thinking. So, how long do you think that your business would last without your IT system? So, we're going to give you 4 options: 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, or a year. So, we're going to push a survey out to you now. I'll give the people about 30 seconds just to think about that. Hopefully, that's come up for everybody. Okay, quite interesting. I'll give people another kind of 15, 20 seconds. All right, I'll pause there and I'll send the results to you so you can see. Hopefully this is coming up for everybody. So what's come back? Most people, a day, a week. There is no right or wrong answer on this, I will say. But, if you are answering in the 1 day, 1 week category, some of this guidance and things to think about today will be really, really critical for you. This is to make sure that, those systems that you use and rely on for your business are absolutely never out for longer than a day or a week, hopefully, okay? So no right or wrong answer on that one. We'll go on to a second poll. So how long do people think it would take a cyber criminal to crack a password of 6 lowercase letters? Again, we've got 4 options for you. 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, or 1 week. So we move on to that one, and hopefully you'll be getting the poll coming up now. Right, a clear winner in that particular one. I'll just send the results to you all now. So most people saying a minute or an hour. Okay. It's a bit of a trick question, this one, actually. The correct answer is actually 4 milliseconds. So Gareth, do you want to give us a bit of an explanation of how that's possible?
Yeah, I know. It's scary, isn't it? The short answer is maths, but I feel I should give you a little bit more depth than that. So when websites save passwords, say you set up an account with a website and they save that password, they save it using a one-way encryption method. Now, very, very frequently, websites are breached and those encrypted password lists are stolen. The criminal will then try a number of different passwords to see if they can run it through the same one-way encryption and match it to the password that's stored in the list. Now, the slowest way to do this is what's known as brute force, where they literally try every possible combination of letters and numbers until they match the password that you've got. That's the slowest way to do it. Now, think of it this way. If I had a password that was only 1 digit of numbers, then that would give 10 possible combinations, and you can imagine how quickly we could crack that. If you had 2 digits, well, then that's 100 combinations, and that's going to be a lot longer. And 3 digits, of course, is 1,000 possible combinations. So you can see how very quickly and exponentially it gets harder and harder to guess all of the possible combinations of a password. So a 6-digit password is really, really not good enough anymore. It's just not up to the job. It can be cracked in 4 milliseconds. But if you went something like a 15-digit password and you used uppercase, lowercase, numbers and symbols, then you're really talking something around the few thousand years to try and crack it using a slow attack. So that's where you want to head. We're looking for 15 characters, mixed case.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gareth. And so this is a key way that attackers are looking to get into businesses now. So maybe if you're sat there thinking, I'm using quite a short length password for my business at the moment, or on my main Windows log-on account, or on your website, for example, maybe a way to go away and change that to a slightly longer and stronger one straight away. Right. So first kind of section of the presentation, how do attackers get in? Okay, this is not an exhaustive list I'm going to go through, but there's kind of 4 key ways an attacker would typically try and attack a business to get hold of data or information to commit fraud. Okay, so the first one, vulnerabilities in your website. So, for example, this could include exactly what we've just said there: weak password requirements. Maybe a website's been designed and coded where actually it only needs a very minimum length password of 6 characters, 8 characters, for example, that's just going to enable someone to do those types of brute force attacks that Gareth said. it could be that the website's not secure and encrypted, so then that would enable somebody to monitor the traffic, for example. Okay. It could be that somebody would look to do something like called a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service. So saying a website attacker may flood it with traffic just to bring it down. Okay, that will usually be followed with a ransom demand. We'll go into that in a bit more detail in a second. The next way, flaws in software. So again, you might be using pieces of software like CRM, customer relationship management systems that come from IT providers. Now, providers of these software or your main IT provider for your things like your Windows software will often offer patches in those software and updates to make sure they are protected against these types of malicious attacks being taken advantage of. Okay, so what it might allow somebody to do, if it is got a kind of software flaw, it might allow an attacker, if they can get through things like firewalls that you might have in place to get in, they can then get into that software and start moving around in it. They'll be looking the data, can they make payments, change details, that kind of thing. Okay. The next thing, people. This is a key one, and it's often the first line of defense for people, but criminals will look to take advantage of people as a way to get into your business, to get hold of data or money. So again, that could be done through coercing insiders in an organization. That could be, say, offering cash for data. It could be phishing emails. I'm sure people have heard that. This is where an email comes in looking as though it's from another company or a real company, but actually, it's giving you links to a fake website to go and harvest credentials, or it could be attached with a file which could contain malware. And that takes us on to the next one, the most common, probably an increasing trend of what we're seeing as an organization, but it's usually deployed via attachments in emails, but it could also come through websites or even mobile device messages. So these are little software packages that could be in an attachment. They'll then look to get into devices that you're using or your network, for example, and they will run scripts and code designed to do things like encrypting all your files and data or send data back to the criminals. So for example, Jeff Bezos, the Amazon CEO, he fell victim to something like this through a WhatsApp message recently. So it's not just through emails these days, it's even through kind of smart devices and messaging software like that. Okay. There's a common theme here, I would say. All these types of attacks will be used to try and generally steal data from you, of your clients, your customers, your members, and probably then to commit fraud is all with the intent of making criminal gain. So there's rarely people these days doing it purely for fun, as maybe it might have been seen 15, 20 years ago. These are often organized criminal groups, and some of them will even be backed by nation state kind of attackers, so Russia, China, North Korea intelligence. I know Marion and Darren would be able to back me up on this, but they would say, there is evidence that these big kind of more corrupt countries potentially are sponsoring groups to try and do these attacks, constantly looking for ways they can make gain, make money, get data that can be useful. Okay, and what I'd say is, okay, would I be attacked when maybe a smaller business, we're not high profile? Security through obscurity is not a strategy. Okay, we have seen incidents with IFAs in our business. Attackers will go after anything they can find and monetize, generally speaking. So big, small, personal individuals, they'll go after. If there's money to be made, they will do it. Okay, these are organized groups. They're going as far as deploying artificial intelligence and machine learning now to gather this data across the net and find potential targets. Again, like Gareth said with the passwords, if websites have been hacked, it's generally available, data for sale on the dark web, if people have heard of that, a bit of a kind of secret part of the internet that then will be there for people to try and use this data to basically go after individuals and businesses to make money. There's a common theme there of each of those vectors will do. I'll move on then to the next section, website attacks. I'll go into this in a bit more depth. So there's a range of different attack methods here that attackers may do. Okay, so the first one, like we mentioned, it could be that your website is deploying, if you've got one, has a weak password shrink requirement. So it could be used to undertake a brute force attack, like Gareth said, just flooding, website logins with a variety of different logins and password credentials, trying to get in and through into the website. Okay. Think back to that week. If your website is there with only 6 lowercase characters, you are potentially vulnerable to your website getting in, being hacked, and unauthorized individuals getting in to move around in your network, your systems, looking for data, okay? The next one, websites not being secure and encrypted. So again, why this might enable an attacker to monitor the traffic that's going through it. They will then use that to kind of steal data, capture card payment details, for example, if you have that on your website. You can check if you're secure from this. So, if you're done for you by a third-party provider, for example, just look for the HTTPS in the start of the website URL. Sometimes most modern website browsers have a little padlock symbol by it, for example, to show that it's a secure website. And most modern internet browsers, your kind of Edge browser, Google Chrome, for example, will automatically flag these days as a website's not secure. Okay. Another attack method that could happen, I've already mentioned it, something called a DDoS attack. So this is where criminals will flood a website with traffic. They will often use maybe a botnet device to do this in order to bring a website down and make it unresponsive. So that is then usually followed by a ransom demand from the criminal to say, right, well, if you pay us X amount, then we'll stop the attack. It's probably more likely an attack on higher profile companies, but actually it could be used as a distraction technique from other companies to stop, to basically go and do something else. And another final way, it could be defacing a website. So again, if someone can get in using the credentials to change a website, they may look to change things like contact details on it, change the links for forms that you may have on your website. Again, all with the idea of sending data to the wrong place, which they can then use to commit fraud. Okay. So how can you protect yourself from this? Okay. Number one, use a reputable website provider. There are many out there on the market. I'm not going to try and run through them all, but it's about doing your due diligence. Make sure they're a good company. Look at the T's and C's they're providing, the services they're offering. Okay. Number two, strong access credentials. We can't stress this enough. So make sure it's a nice, long, strong password to get into the website. Ideally, two-factor authentication as well. So this is where maybe a text message is sent to another phone in order to log in, for example, to stop somebody trying to get into the website that's not authorized. So as I mentioned, make sure the website's using technologies such as HTTPS. That is making sure that the website traffic is running in encrypted traffic. Capture, for example, this is where you might see where they're you complete a form and then you get a picture with select all the traffic lights or select all the fire hydrants, for example. This is designed to stop robots maybe continually flooding and completing forms into your business. Again, secure contact forms is kind of linked to that, and strong password enforcement. And finally, ensuring that your website is subject to something called a penetration test. So again, if you're using a reputable website provider, they may well offer this service for you, okay? But if they're not, it's recommended there's many accredited penetration testers on the market, and they can run tests on your website to make sure it's safe, it's secure, and if there's any issues and vulnerabilities within that, how to close those off and make sure that you are safe.
Ali, just to interject, I've got a lot of questions coming through about passwords and how to use and remember lots and lots of good secure passwords. So really simple advice is use a password manager where you possibly can. That's recommended by the National Cybersecurity Centre. Use a password manager. That will allow you to remember and create unique, strong and long passwords. That is the best advice, really.
Thank you, Gareth. Right, we'll move on to the next section, business email compromise. So an increasingly common attack type we're seeing, and particularly with IFAs, actually intelligence from our organisation is actually showing that this is an increasing trend for committing fraud, particularly on investments and savings products that your clients in the IFA population might have, for example. Okay, so what is this? Criminals will maybe look to impersonate email addresses. This will be for tricking customers into transferring money to the wrong destination or to the wrong account details. So, sometimes, again, link it back to that password credentials, that if you're giving up your credentials at another point where your customer has, a criminal might be sat there just monitoring, waiting, checking for that moment that a transaction or a payment might be taking place, okay? Or another way, as I mentioned, they're in an email inbox, either for your client, your customer, your member, or yourselves, okay? So they're monitoring that traffic. Or they're just sat there looking to harvest data from it, okay? So again, they're looking for what's going on, the kind of accounts that people have, or businesses they deal with, all to build up a profile of you, your business, and what you're doing. Okay, so it's increasingly common. People may hear it in the kind of mortgages and solicitors. So criminals will often go after that space because, again, it's that classic payment fraud at the moment. The customer might be purchasing a house, transferring deposit to the solicitor. They'll try and get in there, pretend to be the solicitor, for example. Yeah, we've changed our bank details. Can you please send it here? And somebody sends their deposit to the wrong place. Okay, but there are lots of technical controls we'll go through. But I'd actually say, in addition to those technical security controls, you may want to consider non-technical processing. So, use of code words, secondary approval for payments. Something you use in your organization to say, actually, we're doing a critical moment where we're sending money around or sending a lot of data around. We're going to use that kind of code word or process that's only known internally to prevent this. Okay, but what can you do from a technical perspective? So, be wary of phishing emails that you receive. Okay, the keywords we use internally in Lloyds Banking Group and Scottish Widows is think before you click. So if you have an email, where you're expecting it, does it come from outside of your organisation? Check the email domain that email's come from. Is the spelling good in the email? Is it kind of forcing a demand in a timescale? That kind of thing. Criminals will often try and put pressure on people to make decisions quickly because they think something's wrong. Okay. The next one, use strong passwords again and change them regularly, or as we've already said, two-factor authentication wherever possible. So this is where, a lot of websites and accounts will offer this now. Most of the main email providers will say if you want to have a text message go to a secondary device before you log in, that can help prevent some of this thing. Okay. And then training your staff, I've already came in one of the main attack methods at the start. People can be a weakness, but they're also your first line of defense. So, ensuring you have cybersecurity, data security training, especially around phishing, is particularly key to try and prevent some of these attacks. Gareth, can you give us any cases where this has been taken advantage of, for example?
Oh, very much so, very much so. So there was a very, very famous case highlighted just recently. You'll find it in BBC News or you can Google for it. But the FBI raided a number of addresses in Nigeria, alleging that massive fraud had been perpetrated through business email compromise. So the FBI said that the email was being intercepted by the criminals between real estate agents, as you mentioned, solicitors and their clients. And they were doing it at the point of payment. So they would be monitoring the communication. And at the point that bank details were exchanged, then the criminals would go and intercept that and change the bank details to their own. And so where people thought they were paying for their houses, they were actually handing over hundreds of thousands of pounds and dollars to these criminals. In fact, one of the alleged fraudsters was really famous on Instagram and liked to show off his luxurious lifestyle on a daily basis to his 2.5 million followers. When the police arrested that guy, they recovered $40 million in cash, $40 million in cash, along with 13 luxury cars worth like $7 million. And also, and this is the really interesting thing, the names and addresses of nearly 2 million victims. So this is industrial scale stuff perpetrated by gangs that are as big as any company you'd like to see that are doing this on an industrial basis.
Thank you, Gareth. As I say, we are seeing intelligence on this, that criminals are targeting the IFA market as well. So again, particularly savings and investments products, if you're operating on behalf, of your clients, those types of products, it's a more of a cash-based product. So potentially, if you think that, a pension product, for example, a life insurance, critical illness product, for example, they're going to be slightly more difficult for a criminal to encash money out of it. But something that is an investment product, that is what they more likely will go after. So it's being wary around that particular area. Right, the next section, home and mobile working. And as Siobhan said at the start, you think we covered, I'm sure many people in our audience today are working from home right now. I am personally, I'm sure a lot of you are. It's obviously gone through the roof since COVID. The benefit of flexible, agile life-work balance, for example, but there are risks to be aware from it as well that you need to think about. So typical ways that this could be taken advantage of, something called remote desktop protocol. So this is where criminals may convince people to allow you to take over your device. So it might start with what's known as a phishing attack, where a criminal phones you up. They've maybe got your phone details from another data breach that's occurred. They'll ring up pretending to be an IT support line or somebody from Microsoft, Google, and say, will you allow me to remotely connect to your desktop? And at that point, if you've left websites logged in and things like that, they'll go after everything they can do, okay? Next thing, USB sticks. So an incredibly important way that you need to be careful on. Criminals will sometimes give malicious removable devices to people. They'll have malware, ransomware installed on them. The moment you put them into your device, then it's going to deploy that malware onto your machines and into your network potentially. They're designed, these pieces of code, to spread as much as they can. It then might lock down all of your files, all your data in demand for a ransom payment, or it's sending data back to a criminal, and it will all happen in the background, something like that. You may not even be aware, okay? So the big advice is don't insert USBs into your machine unless you're sure of where it's come from. Be wary of free trial software that might be online. Make sure it's from a genuine and reputable provider that you're aware of. Another way, weak public Wi-Fi connections. So I know I've seen Gareth actually do this at events I've attended. It's pretty easy to create fake public Wi-Fi networks. These are insecure. People connect to them. So often if somebody's in Starbucks or the train station, they'll create a network. It will say, Starbucks free Wi-Fi, but it's not really. It's completely insecure. Criminals will then use that to monitor the traffic that's flowing through it, looking for credential details, any sensitive data that they can put to their game, okay? So how can you protect yourself from this? One, ensure you regularly update your device with the latest patches, like we said earlier. This will stop those particular vulnerabilities, particularly remote desktop protocol, being taken advantage of. Avoid using public and free Wi-Fi connections if you can. So it's better to maybe try and use a 4G connection, MiFi devices and things like that. But generally use secure Wi-Fi connections that require a password, and then the traffic through it is encrypted. Providing your staff with dedicated work equipment rather than using their own if possible. Sometimes that's not the case, but if you are giving staff their own devices, there's lots of different ways you can do that securely rather than allowing them to download data onto their own device. You can also, working with your IT provider, make sure that USB sticks are actually blocked. There are software packages like McAfee which can do that for you to make sure that actually if a stick's plugged in, it will be blocked, for example, okay? When staff are working from home or in public places, just making sure it's away from open windows and doors. You'll often get low-level criminals who will take opportunistic chances if they see an open window and there's a laptop right next to it, or they'll just sit there looking at a screen trying to see what they do. So again, things like privacy screens on devices are very useful in a way of stopping that potential way of your client's data being stolen. And then finally, we've said it before, two-factor authentication for logging in, but also something called a secure VPN. So it's a virtual private network on connection. So again, there's lots of different solutions on the market out there, but this means that traffic, even if you did connect to a public Wi-Fi, for example, is creating that virtual private network to encrypt the traffic that's flowing through. Gareth, obviously we've got a lot of colleagues in Scottish Widows, haven't we, working from home at the moment. You can run through some of the guidance we've given to colleagues beyond what we've done here?
Yeah, the advice that we give to colleagues is always fairly simple. It's little things that you can do to make a big difference. So the first is make sure your workspace is safe and professional. That's important, obviously, because you don't want daytime telly blaring down your phone whilst you're trying to sell products. But also keep yourself away from windows and avoid being overheard. It's easy to work with a window open and your next door neighbour is catching everything that you say and pop it on Facebook. So we want to avoid that. Only use the IT that we provide. That's the other key message, because people are always tempted. They think, well, I'm working at home, so why can't I use my home laptop or my home computer? That's not a good idea. The laptops that we provide for our staff are really carefully secured, and we make sure that they've got all the latest patches and all the good stuff on there. So we always tell our staff, please don't be tempted to use your home devices. Don't email stuff home or use your home software, and please don't use your personal printer. So just use what we provide to you, because we know that it's secure and we're looking after it. We always say lock your PC when you're not in front of it. because you just never know who's wandering around your house. We have people that live in shared houses. We don't know who's there. It may be that you have staff or cleaners or people that are around your house. So if you're not in front of your computer, lock it. Use the Windows key and L at the same time, and that'll just lock it. And then when you're finished for the day, put it away and put the papers away and just keep them all neat and tidy. And then you know that there's no temptation for people to oversee things. And of course, just because we're at home, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't maintain the great habits that we always use, whether we're in the office or not. So as we mentioned, lots and lots, strong and unique passwords. Make sure that you handle data correctly, encrypt it when you need to, and always, of course, be careful of phishing emails, which are a major threat, and I'm sure we're going to talk about later.
Thank you, Gareth. Right. The next theme then, so social engineering and your online profile. So kind of touched on this a little bit already, but criminals will increasingly use what's called your digital footprint, and that's how they can start a potential fraud or attack on you or your business. Okay, so digital footprint. What do I mean by that? It's kind of what information you've left on the web about you or your business. And criminals will use multiple attack techniques to gather this data. Okay, so they'll look at social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, text messages if they've got access to your device. Okay, I'm always very wary, I have to say myself, if I see these kind of posts on social media that will say, fill in this form. What's your favorite holiday location? What's your favorite football team? Why are people doing that? Well, it's generally to try and gather data that might be a password, a credential for them to get in. So, be very, very wary about what information you leave on the internet, on public forums, social media, because it can be used then against you to try and access your systems, commit fraud, impersonate you or your business, and commit identity theft. Okay. What do we say to our colleagues and staff, and what should you be thinking about to protect yourself and your business? Okay, so think before you click on any messages that you receive that are not expected or do not feel right. Someone might be trying to gather more data about you to commit that type of fraud. Ask your staff to limit what they post about themselves on social media. So you may see things like privacy settings on your accounts for these websites. It's making sure it's limited to just your friends and connections only. Don't be putting posts out there which are open to all and public. People on LinkedIn will often say, I'm the database engineer, for example, at IBM. Okay, that's giving a criminal a potential easy target that they want to go after because you're revealing too much about yourself. So it's not to say to staff and colleagues that you can't go on these sites, absolutely not. But just think and be careful about what you're putting on yourself on there, because it can just be the start of a potential attack. And then finally, search your name. Put your name in Google or Bing or something like that, and say, actually, if you search yourself, what can you find? And if there's anything you're not comfortable with, or it gives too much away about yourself or your business, then it's a good step to try and limit that audience. Go onto those websites, delete the data, or limit its audience. So Gareth, any examples that you could give us where this has been used to a criminal's advantage, for example?
Yeah, we've had a few instances recently of staff being called out of the blue, actually on their personal mobiles, which is quite interesting. So somebody somehow has managed to find a personal mobile linked to a group employee, and their phone calls say things like, "We're from the IT support team, and we can see that your laptop's got an issue. We need to log into that laptop, please, and do some maintenance." And when the caller was questioned a bit harder, it all began to reveal itself as a bit of a scam. We've also had colleagues called on the phone from people saying that they are from HR, and that there's been a problem, and that they need to come into the office, or they need to hand over the laptop, or they need to do some other action. And again, colleagues have been wise to these kind of scams and been able to put the phone down and report it to us. We've also interestingly seen phishing emails being sent to colleagues and then being followed up with phone calls. And that means that, while you might spot a phishing email and think, this looks a bit dodgy, somebody phones up and says, "Oh, no, that was from me. It's okay. It is absolutely legitimate. Yeah, no, definitely. I'm from ABC supplier. We have changed our bank details. Just click on the link and change your stuff." But of course, both the phone call and the phishing email from criminals. So yeah, it's quite common to combine those types of attacks and try and fool staff. So be on your guard. Have really good processes in place. I mean, if you do get anything like that, you double check it, call the person back, or have processes to in some way double check that what the caller is saying is true.
Thank you, Gareth. Right. Just to check everybody's still listening. So another poll. Before we go into it, so kind of linked to our next section, but then what percentages of businesses have reported having cyber security breaches or attacks in the last 12 months? So again, I'm going to give you 4 options. 10%, 26%, 35%, or 46%. So just put that survey out and we'll give 30 seconds or so for people to respond to that one. Right, let's have a look. I think that's pretty much a good proportion of everybody. So you're getting the results there. Most people went for 46%, 35%. The right answer was 46%. That was actually from an Office of National Statistics survey earlier this year of businesses, and it's on the rise. So basically, put it another way, that it's almost like a 1 in 2 chance, as it would be, that your business could be subject to a breach or attack within the next 12 months. So it's on the rise. And a particular way and increasing trend we're seeing that happening from intelligence is malware and ransomware. So as I touched on earlier, this is, malicious software packages or code that is deployed into your devices, your networks, for example, that is then designed to just wreak havoc, and it can have absolutely devastating impacts to businesses. So there's a couple of ways it happens. Malware will typically is designed to gather and steal data, control devices, capture login credentials, which will all then be used to go in and complete an attack or a fraud at a later date. Okay, ransomware, people may have heard that particular term. It's the same kind of thing, but it's generally where all the files on your devices, your network, the code is designed to go through and encrypt it and lock it. You'll then receive a ransom demand from the attackers of, okay, yeah, if you want to get all your files and data back, you need to pay money to this location here. It's typically, the demand will be in cryptocurrency, something like Bitcoin, which is designed to kind of avoid detection of where that payment's gone and who it's really gone to. We'll run through some real world examples of this later, but it is definitely on the up is what we see. Again, link it back to that kind of point on nation state attackers. There's criminal gangs out there being sponsored to try and develop this stuff. Sometimes it's to attack businesses and money and get fraud, but actually some of it is also in things like election fraud or, going after critical net infrastructure of countries as well. Increasingly, countries like Iran, North Korea are doing this. So it's very real and it's on the up. Okay, how can you protect yourself against this? Okay. Sorry, the software's being a bit slow. Just go back. Regularly backing up your systems and data. Okay, can't stress it enough. But if the worst were to happen and this kind of thing happened, having a backup and a copy of your systems and data is the best protection. And keeping that on a separate network or a separate location, or even better on an offline device is okay. If the worst were to happen, at least you can go back to the data you've taken at the last cut. Generally, for an organisation like Lloyds Banking Group, we're backing up systems and data multiple times a day. The other bit of that is ensuring you've got the latest security updates and patches on your devices and using a good antivirus product. So something like McAfee, for example, will sit there scanning your devices, your networks, to make sure if any of this code is there, it's designed to detect it, quarantine it, and get rid of it. Okay. Consider purchasing cyber insurance is another way. Increasingly, companies are doing this. There are companies out there on the market, or a broker like Arthur J. Gallagher, for example, where you can buy insurance against this type of attack. I would just, word of caution with it, make sure you check the conditions of the policy. It will probably require that you are following good security practices in order to benefit from a payout if the worst were to happen and you had disruption to your business, or a fine, for example, from the ICO for that. But it is a good way to potentially mitigate and protect your business. Be very, because we talked about this earlier with phishing emails, but be very wary of emails with attachments and links, something that's asking you to click, where it creates that kind of emotional response. Those keywords, think before you click. If you weren't expecting it, it's come from outside of your organization. it's got a demand that you need to open this or provide your details in the next 5 minutes, or otherwise you're going to lose access to your systems, it's probably not real, okay? And then finally, we touched on it before, people are the first line of defense, but also a potential weakness. So make sure they're trained, particularly on phishing emails. As an organization with Lloyds Banking Group, for example, we do phishing test emails to our colleagues every month. Gareth's team actually does that, where we're doing thousands of test emails to try and test that colleague understanding. So they're harmless, but it's a good way of testing, are your staff aware and following what they need to do. Right, next section, before we get on to Q&A, cloud risk. So this is an increasing area. We're seeing a lot of businesses and companies, including themselves, are moving data and systems to be hosted on the cloud. And what do we mean by the cloud? I guess that's the first starting point. And what is cloud computing? A phrase I often heard is there's no such thing as the cloud. It's just another person's computer. Essentially what it means is that rather than hosting data on your own network or your own servers or your own computers, you're basically hosting it with another specialist IT company. So typical providers of this are Amazon Web Services, Google, Microsoft, as you can imagine. There are a few other providers out there. And why do people and businesses look to do this? It's often cheaper than running your own data centers. You don't have the cost of maintaining your hardware, all the technical and physical security controls around it. You may well be considering to do because of that cost benefit. I think it definitely is the future of computing solutions, but it comes with potential risk, particularly configuration issues. So this might be that, are you responsible configuring the access controls to it, managing those user access permissions for people to get into your systems that you're hosting on there? And because of that, it can be openly accessible by mistake to criminals. Okay, so you need to be extremely careful before doing it to make sure that risk is being managed. Okay, what we would say, how can you protect yourself and your business? If you're looking to do this or you have already done it, check the level of service you're paying for from your cloud service provider. You'll find with companies like Amazon, for example, that they offer different levels of service, from we are just hosting it and you're responsible for everything, right through to they will configure all the security and do it on your behalf. Okay, so recheck those, what you're actually getting and what you're responsible for and what they're responsible for. There's lots of benefits, but there's lots of pitfalls if it's done wrong. Okay, and then finally, review that your responsibility and your liability provision. So you'll find those T's and C's, the terms and conditions with your cloud service provider. They will say what they're responsible for and if there is any liability should data be lost, compromised, or your systems are compromised from the cloud. Right, onto real life examples of when this has gone wrong, and then we'll open up to some Q&A. So people may have heard of the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, and a little something called GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, which came into force in 2018. I think people mostly remember getting a lot of emails saying, do you still want to get emails from us, and unsubscribing around that time. It came into force in about May 2018 in the UK and the European Union. And whilst the majority of that regulation is aimed at data privacy, so things like, marketing consents, marketing preferences, data subject access requests, privacy notices, the individual rights of consumers, it also includes about security requirements that organizations need to take. The general wording is you need to take appropriate organizational and technical measures to protect data. So if you and your business are a data controller or data processor, these laws and requirements are applicable to you, okay? And the ICO, they can issue fines of up to 4% of your turnover, or 20 million euros for getting this wrong. So if you have a personal data breach, this can be really painful to a business in terms of that financial hit if it goes wrong. Gareth, do you want to go through these just very quickly, but some of the real examples? Do you want to touch on British Airways and what happened to them?
Yeah, I mean, they were also fined. They were fined £183 million, and of course the fine is just the easy bit to stomach. It's dealing with your customers and the lack of trust that is going to be shown. So British Airways were fined £183 million because they allowed criminals to scrape credit card details from their payment site. Now, it's not entirely clear how criminals managed to do this, and as you can imagine, British Airways are being pretty cagey about it. But there is a fair amount of speculation that allowing adverts on the payment page could have been a way in for hackers. Now, point of sale devices with them, tills or all sorts of different ways of taking payment are a target for criminal gangs, and some criminal gangs actually specialize in this. This is what they do. So as ever, the advice is use a reputable payment service for taking payments, and always keep your devices up to date. So that's taking the latest updates from the manufacturer, sometimes called patches. If you keep your device up to date, then that's great.
Thank you, Gareth. And another one here. So Travelex, people may have seen this in the news around December last year, January this year. So what happened to Travelex? So they basically were impacted by a ransomware that infected their systems and network, came in through their website. The key message is they did not patch vulnerable software despite advice to do so. And what happened is they ended up paying a $2.3 million ransom to a cyber criminal gang to get their systems back and get their data unencrypted, to get their currency online. So during that period, they actually had their staff using pen and paper again to transact those currency transactions for their customers. So, should you ever negotiate with criminals, it's a tricky one. They decided to pay out and it got their business back. Criminals often, they'll up the demand and things like that. It's a very tricky situation here. The biggest thing, they could have prevented it by doing that in advance and protecting and patching their software. Gareth, Saudi Aramco.
Yes, Saudi Aramco, for those of you that don't know, is possibly one of the biggest companies in the world. They are estimated to be something around 10 times bigger than the Apple Corporation. And they were compromised, not Apple, of course, Saudi Aramco, were compromised by a phishing email, it's thought. So hackers planted malware on the network of Saudi Aramco, and it was triggered by the hackers during the holy month of Ramadan, when the company was at possibly its lowest staffing level. Now, the malware that they installed and executed wiped out 35,000 computers before it then started attacking the company's servers. The company lost their payroll, it lost their directories, it lost their shipping databases, and it got so bad that they actually took the whole company offline, and at one point were giving away their products, their oil, to random customers just to keep their production facilities working. It all started from one phishing email, and it's estimated to have cost them billions of dollars to put it right. There's a brilliant a podcast all about this story on Darknet Diaries, I think it's called. Possibly we'll send out the link afterwards, but it's a really interesting story. So now I suspect that many businesses that had smaller cash reserves would not have survived this level of attack. So it just shows how potent attacks can be through just a simple phishing email, which accounts for probably 90% of the start of all cyber attacks.
Thank you, Gareth. And finally, TalkTalk. So this is a bit of an older one, actually, backing from October 2015. So it started as a DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack. That was actually the destruction, though. So it was actually a 20-year-old hacker. So this is a bit earlier rather than the organised criminal gangs, but this attacker then did something called an SQL injection attack onto the website, an insecure page, and that allowed that attacker to get through to a customer database. 157,000 customers' data was exposed, and that actually included 15,000 bank account details of those customers. Okay, so TalkTalk, they had suffered two similar attacks actually on that particular page earlier that year, but they didn't take any action to remove the pages or make them secure. I don't think the pages were actually even needed for their business, which is the irony. And the ICO issued them a £400,000 fine at the time, pre-GDPR. So I can only imagine what that fine might have been for them had it been a couple of years later. The good news for them, actually, they only actually paid £320,000. They settled early, they admitted their mistakes and learnt from it. So I think, be wary. This kind of stuff, again, your customers, your clients, your members could suffer, but actually it can hit your business in the pocket as well. The list goes on. There are countless other examples out there. And whilst these may all look like big companies and examples we're using, we see it all the time. Criminals will go after businesses of all shapes and sizes, and they'll look to exploit weaknesses if there's money to be made. Tony, I think that's myself and Gareth done it. It's just over to you for any Q&A.
Fantastic, guys! Thanks ever so much for so much information, so much and so many examples as well. I've done a few of these Q&As in recent weeks on the expert series. This is probably the one that's seen the highest number of questions. Just as a reminder to folks on the call, we will look to collate the themes of the questions and actually provide some answers after. There's no way we're going to be able to cover off all the questions in the 9 minutes we've got left, so we will look to do that. So I've got a few. You guys can decide, I guess, who's best to answer these. Some themes coming through. So with so many people working from home now, a couple of questions around things like home routers and personal printers. How exactly are these items compromised, and what can folk do to make sure that their colleagues working from home are staying safe using their personal routers and their personal printers?
I can take that if you like. So I did answer a couple of questions on home routers and offer some advice there. So do have a look back in the answered questions. When you're using home routers, the first and most important thing is to change the default passwords that come with them, because when they ship from the internet provider, they're deliberately made easy to set up. And so they'll come with, basic security settings that are the absolute essential. So change any default passwords that are on there. It's a good idea to change the default SSID. That's the name that gets broadcast, because that obviously often refers to the type of router and gives any hackers a clue as to what it is. It's really essential to switch off remote management, which would allow somebody on the internet to log into the router, again, if they had the default username and password. It's a good idea to turn off things like UPnP and WPS, which are both features to make things really easy for the router to be used, but are sometimes used by malware. If you Google for how to configure my home router to make it more secure, there's some great articles out there too that'll take you through more detailed steps. When it comes to home printers and things like that, as my advice was before, use the equipment that's provided to you by your company. Now, I appreciate that some of you will be providing your own equipment, and it's hard to give specific advice on every device. But what I'd say is consult an IT specialist who can advise you specifically on the right devices to use and how to keep them safe. There are printers that contain, just like your router does, a way to log into the printer. They have default passwords on them, and there's even examples where people can send malicious documents to them and compromise them. So get specialist advice, I think, when it comes to that kind of thing.
Thank you. That's spot on. Another question that's kind of on a theme as well as around the wonderful world of spam and junk mail as well. One comment made, which I absolutely get, is whether or not GDPR has actually had any impact on the amount of junk mail that we appear to be getting. But the wider theme coming through is, are there ways to avoid and reduce the volumes coming through? And indeed, should we fully delete items that go into spam immediately, or do we just let the spam filter, the spam folder, do its thing?
I think my advice on this was very much be careful where you put your email address. So the spam will tend to build up because you've subscribed to lots of things, or your email address is out there on the web. Now, I absolutely understand that it is a necessity of doing business that you give your email address out to people, but be careful, what sites you put it on, because that can be scraped by illegitimate companies that will then start sending you spam. If you do need to subscribe to sites, you want to receive those newsletters, it's a good idea to set up a separate email address, and then that whatever comes through there is likely to be subscription type emails and possibly spam, and that keeps your main address free for doing business. But keep your digital footprint low, and be careful where you put your email address. I think is probably the best way to avoid spam. Having a really good email provider that's got proper filtering and subscribes to good intelligence sources is also a great idea. That will lower the amount of spam that you get, because it should be trapped by the provider.
And just to add to that, Gareth, I would say, whilst companies like Microsoft and Google, they're taking great efforts to try and block some of these things, and law enforcement are always trying to shut down these gangs. The phrase we use is whack-a-mole. So the moment you shut them down from sending these kind of junk, malicious potential emails that you don't want, they'll just pop up somewhere else and do it again. So my advice would be, don't rely on your email provider or your spam filters to do it. If you don't think you need it, you won't expect it. Just delete it. Get it off your device.
Thank you. Absolutely spot on. Thank you. One question I've got is around the wider support for security training, and actually I'll happily pick this one up myself around what more is available from Lloyds Banking Group to support people around their cybersecurity. We've actually got a website, lloydsbankacademy.co.uk. Now, I'd recommend that for anyone, lloydsbankacademy.co.uk, because that provides support whether you're running charities, business, education for financial education for children. There's all sorts of content on that website. If you then extend it out to /learn-for-business, that's learn-for-business, there's lots of content in there around the general running of business, but specifically around the digital aspect and cybersecurity as well. So take a look, lloydsbankacademy.co.uk. Is a great resource as it is, but then if /learn-for-business will definitely take you to more resource that you can share with your colleagues, as well as this call, of course. Guys, a couple more questions for you. Many of us are getting of an age. Tips for remembering passwords. I heard the other day that it's safer to actually write them down. You've got less chance of them being stolen from your house than you have of having a simple one and repeating the same one over and over again. I'm not sure that's the best advice. But what tips have you got for remembering them?
Yeah, the good news is that we've moved to a point now where we don't have to write them down, and we don't even have to remember them. So the advice from the NCSC is to use a password manager. The password manager is simply a tool that sits sometimes on your browser and sometimes on your device, built in by Apple and Google into their devices. Where a password is asked for, it will suggest a strong password that's strong and unique. So, and it will then remember that for you. So next time you come back to that website, it says, right, I know the password for this site, and it will submit it for you. So you don't have to remember them all. They're all strong and they're all unique, which is brilliant. Now, clearly, what's very important is that we have a very strong password for our password manager. Now, often I get asked, does it not increase the risk having all my passwords in one place? There is always a balance, of course, but the NCSC does strongly advocate using a password manager. Now, we're not allowed, and nor would we suggest any particular product. I can't suggest an individual password manager for you, nor, unfortunately, can we suggest any antivirus products or recommend any individually. I would say that Apple and Google have them built in, and if you were to use a search engine and look for best password managers, there's a range in there, and I've noticed that the same names keep coming up over and over again in all the different reviews, so that should give you a bit of a choice there too. I wouldn't really recommend writing them down unless you absolutely had to, and absolutely please don't use the same password across multiple sites, because as I mentioned earlier in the call, it's where a website gets compromised, and lots of websites have been compromised, and some big ones too. They will steal that password. Then routinely they will try that password in all your different accounts. So you might lose a password from a shopping site, and if you've used that in your email, they'll get into your email and start resetting other accounts, or they might try it in your PayPal, your Amazon, your work accounts, and you can only imagine the damage that could be caused there. So password managers is definitely the way forward.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And that takes us fully up to time with more questions still coming through. So as I've said already, we will look to get some themes together and provide some answers to the questions to all of those that have dialed in. This call is available ongoing from here just by using the same link that you did to dial in today. So please, feel free to share that with colleagues. Gareth, Darren, Alec, thank you so much for your contributions today. It's been absolutely fantastic. When we close this call down, there is a very quick survey that we would ask you all to take a quick look at to give us some feedback on your thoughts for today, and one or two wider questions as well to help us with some future planning as well. So thank you all very much for your time today. Have a great afternoon.